Welcome, friends of tales of fae and folk, and back to Dartmoor we're going. Today I shall tell you of a pixie battle, of two maids and their strange tale, of a courtship that went wrong, and a witchery black fox. Once long ago there were two types of pixies found on Dartmoor, the good ones and the bad ones, exactly the same with we humans. The good pixies could be found in the moorland valleys and woodlands, nature-loving and also frequent visitors to the Dartmoor cottages and farms. Here they knew they could find a bowl of milk left for them for a little work, or a chunk of the best bread. The wicked pixies, their place was the deep tin mines and the holes found on the moor, dark, dank places dripping with water that seeps through the earth. The thing they loved best was to cause distress among the humans, to create havoc. The good pixies, their relationship with the farmers and cottage holders was one of mutual respect. They carried out menial tasks to help the humans. They were rewarded with food, drink and the warmth of a hearth. The darker pixies, these had no relationship with the human miners. The humans treated these pixie neighbours with a great amount of fear and contempt, and they never left one single thing for them. Not even the crust of a pasty, or a bit of cloth to wrap around themselves. The resentment of these wicked pixies to the light ones was palpable and growing. Jealousy is a terrible thing, dear friends, and it has its place in the fairy world as well as ours. Over time there were skirmishes between these two groups of pixies. There was the odd shove and push, insults and backhanded looks, usually at pixie sabbats where they would congregate at certain times of the year. One fine day a group of the mine pixies were resting, and across the way they could notice one of the well-dressed, more genteel pixies collecting nectar and going about on his own merry way. To see him there, so close and so fine to their miserable home and selves, looking so sunshiny and bright and fairy, well, it was enough to make their pixie blood boil. The nectar hit the floor, and the little pixie was on the end of a really good walloping and kicking by the darker pixie group. The battered and bruised pixie limped his way home. His brethren found him in a real state, and this, my friends, was a declaration of war. The bad pixies had one advantage over the others. Years of working secretly alongside humankind, the tin miners had taught them one thing: how to smelt and work metal. These pixies knew how to make weapons, sharp things, knives and arrowheads. They were tooled up ready for a fight. The good pixies, however, had led well-fed, innocent lives, farming. They had never needed to defend themselves against anything. Instead, they decided among all of them to retreat to safer ground, to Blackator Copse. This place is a little woodland we can still visit to this very day, a stand of twisted oaks and moss-coated boulders, part of what is left of the great ancient forest that once covered all of the land. To Blackator Copse it was decided, to the crevasses and caves, to the roots of the trees. A wall was quickly built around the copse. It might protect them for a while at least. Some of the pixies were sent to keep watch over all the area. and they were sent to High Willhays, to the boulders there, to what is known locally in Devon as the Roof of Devon. The Pixies had found that the only thing they could build a wall from around the copse was peat, so they struck out and cut turfs, brick-like shapes of cut earth. One wise pixie gave an instruction. As each of the turfs was placed on the wall, each pixie must think of a good deed it had done for a human. The turf wall had grown and grown, and soon it was finished, and they named it the Wall of Deeds. 3 miles to the east of the copse, the wicked pixies had gathered at the old Wheel Virgin mine on the East Oakmont River Valley. Their knives and arrows were sharp and shining in the light. They had stolen a barrel of cider from the human tin miners, and they were taking swigs of this brew, raising the battle fury with cries and whoops. Now here I should tell you a little about Devon cider. In its raw form, it is a very harsh brew, known to strip the paint off cars if they are left in the sun after a spillage, and this was the rough stuff that these pixies were drinking down. Little by little they became like a group of small berserkers, ready for battle, ready for bloodshed and riot. They took off, drink-fueled and staggering a fair bit, but heading in a group rage to Blackator Copse. From the heights of High Willhays it was easy for the lookouts to see them coming, the noise and their shrieks alone bouncing across the empty moorland and granite rocks. The lookouts gave notice to their assembled comrades down in the woodland. The wicked pixies came to the Wall of Deeds and burst out laughing at the pathetic-looking earthen wall. All they had to do was climb over and slaughter all of the pixie enemies hiding in the trees. But as they climbed, they fell back down. Arrows merely bounced off the turfs, and knife cuts did nothing at all. As a group they flew at the wall, but a ring of light grew around the wall, repelling them back. Again they surged forward. Brighter the light grew, another ring and another ring that threw them back. For a full day and into that night they repeated the same, throwing curses under their breaths, throwing themselves at the wall, and being pushed back by those protective rings of light. Finally, exhausted, they retreated back to Wheel Betsy. At least there was good cider to drown their sorrows, and from that very day the darker pixies stayed in the mines and kept themselves to themselves. Once the wicked pixies had retreated, the golden rings of light began to drift higher and higher, and all over Dartmoor, all over the landscape, fading gently away. Some fell softly to the ground, near the pixies, and in astonishment they saw it left a perfect circle of lush green grass. And the pixies weren't the only witnesses. One of the humans who saw this was a renowned wise woman of the moor. She knew exactly what these bright green rings meant. These were the pixie rings, magical places where if a pixie was threatened, he could stand in the centre and nothing could harm him. At night the pixie folk would gather in these rings to perform their revels, to dance and make merry. However, if you should happen to be on Dartmoor and you ever seen a lush green grass circle, don't enter it, never enter it. This is protected by pixie magic and could be deadly to humans. A ways back in time, possibly in the 1700s, a stranger, a noble fellow, bought a large part of Dartmoor, an estate and a manor. It wasn't known who he was or where his money came from, but it was rumoured locally in hushed tones that there was no good about it, that money had been earned by bad things. As is the way with some fellows like this, with too much money and too little respect or sense, this man was obsessed with hunting and bragging about his wealth. He set up a huge kennels, bought the best dogs, employed brilliant huntsmen, and then ingratiated himself with the local gentry. Pretty soon he became known as a hearty host, only the best for his guests who, to be frank, were every bit as corrupt and boorish as himself. His life on the moor was going rather well, but there was just one small thing that really stopped him from feeling content. One thorn in his side that began to grow and grow in his obsession. When he had bought his parcel of the moor, there was only one place that he could not throw money at enough to buy, and this was a small cottage and a small plot of land in a high moorland valley, and this became his pet peeve. This was owned outright and legally by its owner. The lord of the manor could do nothing. No matter what he thought of to get this tiny plot, everything came to nothing. The cottage owner had the law behind them. He would not be able to take that cottage or its land. Now, the cottage was owned by a Dartmoor woman, an old woman living on her own, and scraping a living from the moor with a few bullocks, some sheep, and growing what she could. The local tales of this woman were rife and varied. She was said to be the granddaughter of a highwayman who once persecuted travellers on the Okehampton road, and it was his money that had bought outright this plot and cottage. She was known as a herbalist and healer who helped the poor locals with their aches and pains and sicknesses, and for this alone they respected her and left her to herself. This woman was the bane of the Lord's life. He was determined that he would have her cottage and land one way or another. He would not be told no. Soon it became time to reap the hay on the moorland farms, and in an act of neighbourliness, some of the local farmers did as usual and helped the old lady cut and stack her hay, food for her cattle and sheep in the harsh moorland winter. The old lady could now rest, knowing her tiny farm was safe and sound over the cold months of the year. It was a dark night when one of the farmers noticed smoke rising from the old woman's farm. He raced as fast as he could to the cottage, but by the time he got there, everything was alight. A ferocious blaze was consuming everything. The next day, the poor old woman's body was found among the ruins of the cottage. Had she tipped over an oil lantern, maybe fallen in the hearth? Eyes turned to the direction of the manor house, stern eyes, accusing eyes that knew what must have really happened. The old woman was laid to rest beneath an ancient yew tree. Some of the moorlanders attended her funeral. She had no family, but at least she had some people there to see her off. It wasn't so long after this that strange things started to happen. A large dark fox with a jet black brush would pad across the land and lay itself down on the grave of the old lady beneath the yew tree. These dark foxes are still seen today sometimes, more native than the red foxes brought to Britain, larger beasts and shaggier too, but even back then they were still rare. So much so they were seen as uncanny, perhaps even agents of the devil himself, looking for souls that their master could steal. And people were wary of this fox, and they noticed that it started to head towards the manor a great deal, and then all of the time. It would hang around the kennels, the hounds barking and baying in fury with the scent of their fox prey in their nostrils. the huntsman would watch the fox purposefully irritate the hounds, taunting them. One night he had had enough. He threw on his clothes and went to face the fox, and it stood there, deep eyes looking deeper and deeper into his soul. The huntsman fled to the safety of his room, because something was just not right about that fox. The next week hunting season opened. Foxes were prey once again, and the weather turned. An iron vice-like grip of cold and ice hit the moorland. The first hunt went ahead, a glory to all but the poor red foxes. The horses and riders gathered, the stirrup cup passed from lip to lip to toast the hunt, and the hunters cheered. Soon they were on their way, over the moor, down the valleys, to the places huntsmen had already scouted where the foxes would hide. And then a sight indeed. A large black-coated fox broke ground, jumping from a stand of boulders and heading over the green grass. The dogs and horses took chase, over the hills, down the gullies, and then the fox fled into a woodland, and seemed to disappear. The huntsman jumped to the ground, to scare the fox into running again, and this the fox did, taking flight once more as fast as the race. The pack of hunters and dogs chased, all the day and into the evening they chased, but never once did they come close to catching that fox, and never once did it tire. Night began to fall now, and clouds were gathering ominously at the edge of the estate lands. It was decided to return to the manor and feast. The fox could be caught another day, it had earned its freedom. The Lord, though, as with all things in his life, refused to see sense. He would not be told no. Enough is enough. He wanted that fox, just as he wanted that cottage, and he would have it. In anger he snatched the huntsman's horn and blew it, and the dogs flew to the horse's side. They set off towards a woodland in the distance, and then the baying of the hounds, the fox again breaking cover. The Lord on to the chase. The huntsman knew that he would be in trouble with his master if he didn't follow, so what could he do? He leapt on his horse and followed also. He became part of the chase once more. As the Lord and the huntsman sped on, the Lord was moving further and further away. The huntsman's horse just could not keep up at all, and above them the clouds were becoming blacker and blacker, roiling and boiling, full of menace. The huntsman watched as far ahead the dogs and the master galloped through the burned-out farm, through the plot and over the crest of a hill out of sight, the dogs baying, echoes sounding over the landscape. And then a booming clap of thunder, and a dreadful flash of light, and there on the hill the silhouette of a black-coated fox. In terror he watched as it stood on its hind legs. It began to move very strangely, and he watched as it began to change, and it changed to the shape of an old woman. His horse reared, the huntsman fell, his head hit one of the boulders, and he fell unconscious, only the baying and the snarling of hounds filling his ears. The huntsman was found the following day, almost dead from exposure, but his master and the dogs, nothing. Their bodies were never found. Had they ridden straight into one of Dartmoor's deadly mires and sank to their doom? Nobody knew. Sometimes on dark nights, with dreadful storms, the sounds of deadly hounds can still be heard, drifting from this part of the moor, and some swore blind that they had even seen spectral hounds and a black rider galloping over the hills. But the huntsman noticed over time that the hilltop where he had seen the foxwoman Well, over time, those boulders started to look like the shapes of dogs, and some even looked like the shape of a horse and rider. And every time he looked that way, he would shudder and turn away and look towards the burned-out farm. Nearby the West Dart River, near Hexworthy, we can find a farm today, Huckabee Farm, and you can even book to camp there. And it is here that our next tale comes from. A long, long while ago, there lived there a lovely young woman, a dairymaid, pretty as a picture. Of course, she became rather popular with the moorland boys, and they would vie for her attention, try to catch her eye, always be hanging around looking to curry favour with such a pretty girl. Over time, one of these lads began to stand out from the rest in her eyes. A farm worker, Tom White, from a nearby farm at Postbridge. Tom's work was intense and hard, as is the lot for farmers and farm workers, and more so in days when it was manual work and no help from machinery. Moments together were few, snatched times but precious. Devoted as Tom was, he would finish his work every evening, eat his meal quickly, straighten himself out and brush himself off, and head off on the 5-mile walk over the moors to Huckabee, where he would be rewarded with the arms and caresses of his true love. He would hike the difficult route, especially after a full day's work, over Lakehead Hill, over Belvoir Tor, off to Dunnabridge, down the River Dart, and to Huckabee. And then, after that most beautiful 2 or 3 hours with his girl, off he would go, back on the same route to his farm home for a sleep, and up early for a day's hard work. Ah, but love, youth, these things sped his footsteps and made her heart light up with hope, and his heart thumped heartily, not just with the effort of the hike, but also with what might be able to happen in the near future. Now, as well as courting and the day's working, Tom had not been idle. He had taken time to find a prospective home for him and his sweet bride-to-be. He rushed one evening with a happy heart to his love to tell her, and of course she was over the moon. She and he stayed the night planning how their home would be and how happy their family would grow. But time had flown. It was dark, and Tom only had a few hours before he had to be up for work. Leaving reluctantly, he took one last glimpse back to those beautiful eyes and set off striding, back on the route to Postbridge. Soon our brave young hero was crossing Belvoir, and near the Tor he thought he heard the sound of voices and laughing. But surely it was just the wind passing through the granite rocks of Belvoir Tor. Well, it could have been, but it was getting louder and clearer. In the dim light he picked his way over the boulders, making his way carefully around the Tor. This now loomed before him. As he rounded the rocks, he stood stock still, because in front of him were small people, dancing in a circle. Others were watching and clapping, others sat lounging on the boulders, laughing, all of them. Pixies. Tom was terrified. As with all moorland folk, he knew the danger of pixie encounters, especially when they were at their revels. But the pixies were so engrossed in their dancing and music, they hadn't noticed a bumbling human almost barge into the dancing ground. Tom did, though. He noticed they hadn't seen him. He crept silently back to the shadows behind the Tor and tiptoed further down the hill. If he could just make a wide circle around Belvoir, he could get past and be safe. And then he slipped, and all the pixie eyes turned in his direction. And then they flew as one to circle Tom. Round and round they went, madly and wildly, feral things in a frenzied jig, circling poor Tom madly. And before his wits could stop him, he was raising himself up and finding his feet and joining the dance. Faster and faster these small creatures spun, and then came their singing, getting louder and shriller, making his head spin and his stomach churn. He begged to be allowed to leave, and they laughed. He pleaded, and they roared, and faster they danced, and faster Tom went. His legs and his feet were in an agony of pain. Faster and faster and faster they flew. He was utterly exhausted by now, and his muscles felt like jellies. Every time he almost fell, a strange force lifted him to his feet again, and his feet would fly, tap, dance and jig. By now poor Tom was in tears, and he looked towards Hameldown, and there were the first rays of the morning sun just starting over the hill. The dark sky was starting to turn lighter and lighter, and now orange, and warmth was starting to creep over the land, dew beginning to drip as the rays hit the cold grass. The Pixies as one now turned to the sun, stopped in an instant, and disappeared between the rocks and the boulders, vanishing from sight. Tom collapsed. In tears fully now, in so much pain and close to his wits' end, he sat upon the ground. As the light and the warmth strengthened, Tom began to wipe his eyes and nose. He could feel his muscles start to regain some strength. He lifted himself to his feet and could barely stagger and limp to the farm where he should have been hours ago. And do you know something? There was no marriage, and the courting stopped too. So traumatised was poor Tom White that he would never pass over the moor in the dark again. Some gossiped that he'd only wanted to break off his engagement and made up a story, but others, wiser moorland folk who knew better, they knew the truth of it. You would never see any one of them travelling over Belvoir Tor at night. A couple of 100 years ago, maybe a little more, when Dartmoor was so much less tame and much more wild and frightening, there lived on a large farm on the edge of the moor 2 maids. These girls were like chalk and cheese, completely the opposite of each other. Polly a hard worker and bright, Molly quite lazy and morose. Despite their differences, they were huge friends, and would walk to the nearby town together arm in arm to meet up with other lads and lasses from the moor. The strange thing for the other young folk was how were Molly and Polly managing to always look so fashionable? They even had gorgeous jewellery despite only being maids. Now, their secret was a fascinating one. Many, many years before, when they were much younger, they had found 2 pixies on the moor, and these little fellows were in a most dreadful state, starving, hungry and close to death. They brought the 2 little ones into the farm kitchen and gave them the best of the foods that would fill them, and with this the pixies recovered. Their lives had been saved. Every night from that day, the 2 maids left some food and milk in the kitchen for the pixies, and in the morning the girls would find gold coins where food had been left, and they told nobody about their secret. It came a time of harvest, and one particular harvest had been extremely difficult. The girls were utterly exhausted, and in their exhaustion they forgot their nightly ritual of leaving out the food and drink. Instead they collapsed into bed and were soon sound asleep. Molly was out cold, snoring. This noise woke Polly, who lay awake in the moonlight that came through the window. In the middle of the night, Polly heard a sound from below, and she tried to wake her snoring friend, but to no avail. The sound got louder and louder and nearer, until Polly saw two tiny figures drop through the keyhole and into their room. The two little creatures protested angrily, stamping their feet and shaking their fists at the lack of offerings. Sighing and still tired, Polly climbed out of bed and shook Molly until eventually the lazy girl opened her eyes drowsily. Polly explained, and Molly simply yawned, turned over and said she was staying in bed. All the pixies on Dartmoor couldn't get her out of bed. Polly sighed. She crept downstairs, slipped across the yard to the dairy with the 2 cups they usually left on the hearth. As she crossed the yard, though, resentment started to build in her. Why was she always the one working harder than Molly, and now Molly expected Polly herself to fill the cups and leave them for the pixies? She felt let down by her friend once again, and this time, though, she was really angry. She filled 1 cup only with milk, her own cup. Molly's cup she left completely empty. Molly could do without her gold and learn to be more kind and considerate. Polly placed the empty and full mugs on the hearth and tiptoed back to bed. Polly heard nothing from below now. The pixies must be drinking the milk, she thought, but now pixies started dropping through the keyhole, one after the other, after the other, after the other, and they formed a ring with a leader on the floor. It was a court. She recognised this from when they were held on Crock and Tor by the tin miners. She pretended to be asleep, but all the time she heard them talking about Molly's punishment. Eventually, the punishment was pronounced. From the morning after, Molly would be lame in 1 leg. The lameness would last 7 years, or until a cure was made from a certain herb found on the moor. The head pixie gave the name of the herb loudly. It had 7 syllables, Polly remembered, same as the years of the lameness. Polly repeated the name over and over, even when the pixies had left, and eventually, still repeating the name of the herb, Polly drifted off to sleep. In the morning, Polly was awoken by a crash to the floor. Molly had collapsed. Polly helped her friend to bed, and feeling tremendous guilt now, she explained everything that had happened. But she had the cure, she said. She would put it right. She could find a herb, rub it on the lame leg. It was called... and nothing. She could not remember a single thing. Molly must remain a cripple. Thankfully, the farmer and his wife kept Molly in work. Thank heavens. They gave her work in the kitchen from that day. Years later, one day, Molly was sent to gather some mushrooms that had been seen in a nearby field. She had put down her crutch and sat on the grass collecting the mushrooms and popping them in a basket. As she gathered them, she noticed a boy coming towards her, and she saw the boy was cross-eyed. In her mind she thought how ugly the boy was, and how strange. And then she saw in his hand he was carrying a plant. He stopped as he came to her and asked if she was called Molly. She said yes and asked what was the matter. He replied nothing, but he had to give her the plant. And at this he hit Molly across her lame leg. The pain in her leg was excruciating, and then she realised she could feel pain. She could feel pain in her once lame leg. Her lameness had been healed. She crawled to her feet unsteadily, the crutch still on the floor. She could walk. In her joy, she had forgotten to thank the strange-looking boy, and she turned to thank him straight away. But he wasn't there. He had vanished. From that day, Molly changed. She worked much harder than Polly, never once taking this opportunity for granted. Little by little her confidence grew too, and she even started to accompany Polly into town again to meet up with their friends. Two girls never had their fancy fashions anymore, but thank heavens they were both healthy and happy. So, until next time, dear friends, keep well, brightest of blessings, and remember, don't play with the fairy folk, or you may end up in one of my folk tales yourself.